As the just energy transition gains momentum in SA, SMMEs are still struggling to keep pace due to funding and manufacturing limitations. Now, the DLO Africa Power Roundtable kicks off tomorrow and it aims to facilitate solutions for these barriers. And joining us now to unpack the possibilities and challenges of the energy sector within the just energy transition is CEO at DLO Energy Resources, Linda Mabhena-Olagunju. Thank you so much for your time, Linda. Now, we're living in a time where even big business has its struggles in fitting into the green energy transitions. They, come up with targets, but then really find it difficult for the business models, being nimble enough to show a sustainable path to those targets. How much more challenging is this for small businesses?
Thank you for having me. I think we need to unpack what those challenges are. One, if you're dealing with the challenges from a need for big and small business to transform and decarbonize. It's a lengthy process to understand how you're going to plug the energy gap within your organization and how you're going to fund that decarbonization process. But what we're finding with big business is that there's a lot of investment, especially from your large industrial users and your mines, to decarbonize their operations. I think the key challenge is always around how you satisfy the portion around baseload power when you are utilizing clean energy sources such as solar. But we're starting to see a lot of innovation from that perspective in terms of technology, and you're seeing a lot of hybrid power plant systems. The second layer of your question is around, the smaller businesses and how they can also sort of decarbonize, but also participate by adding to the value chain of the decarbonization process. It becomes obviously a bit more expensive and costly for smaller business to decarbonize their operations, although banks are starting to come to the party, offering loans and solutions for financing, especially what we've seen with load shedding. So they're offering solutions for smaller businesses to apply for funding to be able to get, for example, solar systems to keep their companies going. I think the more interesting and challenging question is, what happens to the SMMEs that were supplying the coal sector, that were supporting the hydrocarbon sector, and what happens to those supply value chains? I think for me, that's the part that I'm really interested in trying to solve and solution, because those SMMEs still need to be incorporated into the sector. They need to be funded in order to be able to participate in this sector. And we need to make sure we're not losing them and losing jobs.
Yeah, and just actually talking about that, you did say that banks are starting to come to the party, but now you have these SMMEs that have been supplying and supporting, coal-based sectors. And I'm wondering if the financial system is maybe not moving too quickly in terms of its criteria, because of course, to give some of those companies funding, they need to ensure that there are proper targets and proper, action put in place for these businesses to decarbonize. So is the financial system maybe not moving too quickly in terms of their criteria for funding, that they're looking at, for these targets, a lot more quicker than they are actually available?
So it depends. If you're talking about from a public sector perspective, we are all how can I say, slaves to what government decides and allocations that government decides to give the sector. So there we are bound by what is available to bid. So you may find there's more funding at a senior debt level for public IPP processes than there are, let's say, allocations, right? Yeah. But when you're talking about private sector allocation of power, what you find in that process is that the bank is usually involved from the early stage with the sponsor team or the client or its client. So they're walking the process together. What I'm finding interesting is that as much as there's been innovation around funding renewable energy, because a lot of people tend to think, oh, there's a lot of money towards renewable energy. Yes, there is. Yeah. If you're talking senior debt, right, at a project level. But what we have not really sorted out is what I would call the startup capital for local producers who are producing these projects that go and produce power.
Yeah.
So we call that early stage funding for development. So you find that there is some minimal grant funding, and then there's a very convoluted DFI process for funding and accessing those funds. But where we are lacking innovation is having that sort of startup VC capital funding structure for the renewable energy sector. And if you think about the energy transition being just, it means carrying people along and making sure that local players have an equal chance at this thing.
Yeah. I mean, what opportunities or low-hanging fruits are available to SMMEs so that they can actually participate in different parts of the value chain in the green ecosystem?
Oh, there's a number. So a simple example, a lady who was an industrial cleaner, so they had a window cleaning company, not a very high skilled, let's say, sector, but was able to convert that into solar panel cleaning. So that's a very simple low-hanging fruit. You see a lot of drones being utilized by the youth, and especially the youth. I'm always interested in finding how can we plug them into the sector. So getting drones to monitor security on power plants to obtain critical data. And again, data analysts are very important in our sector. Once you've derived the data, how do you convert that into information that can be easily accessible to the consumer? Another thing, for example, people don't realize catering on sites. So if you already have a catering business, this is something you can plug and play. So one of the things DLO actually has is a skills workshop where we run workshops to show SMMEs how they can convert their existing businesses to be able to take advantage of the green energy sector. And that's an important part because not everyone is going to have the opportunity to go back to school and stop their businesses and say, I'm sitting down for a 4-year degree in renewable energy. We need to make sure we're carrying people along. And that's why this roundtable that we're having tomorrow, which is sponsored by APSA, is so important because we're saying to the banks, let's find solutions. Let's work together to find a way forward to make sure that we are all benefiting from this just energy transition.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm glad that you actually touched on that skills development program that you do have, because, of course, the concern is that if we can plug that skills gap outside of the formal education system. Thank you so much for your time. And, of course, looking forward to the outcomes of that roundtable. That was CEO at DLO Energy Resources, Linda Mabhena-Olagunju.